Okay, Uncivilized Vitality. This is going to be a slightly longer video, but it's going to be a setup for members as a reference video. We'll do a series of these of the knots. This one's going to be the hitches. So as always, you know that knot is just a shorthand name for any twist or loops or turns in a rope. But knot refers specifically to stopper knots. We'll have a video on stopper knots. We're going to do one on hitches, loops, bends, and binds, and then some special knots. So to follow along the video, you're going to need at least a fast rope, about 12 feet of rope, and a second rope, better if it's contrasting color. Today I'm going to use orange, bright orange, and just a brown. Some kind of toggle or tent stake, or just a little stick. And then a smaller diameter cord tied into a loop so you can form your prusiks and climb heists and such. And then we'll go from there. So let's get started. Talk about the first hitch. So hitches are anytime you're tying a rope, the end of a rope to something. Typically a hitch is going to be around, for our purposes in the outdoors, I'm going to hitch around a tree or a stake so that I can set up a shelter usually. If we're tying the rope to another rope, we call that a bend. If we're tying the rope around something to hold it together, that's a bind. And then if we tie in the end, like the simple or classic overhand knot, that is a knot, a stopper knot in the end of a rope. If we take a bite and make that into a closed loop by tying a knot in the end, but around the standing part, now we've formed a loop. In this case, a basic noose or a running slip knot. So let's start with the hitches. We'll use same introduction for all the videos, so enjoy that. All right, let's zoom in here a little bit. We'll talk about the first type of hitch. Now there are several types of hitches, and the one we use often at Uncivilized that I teach for the first timers is they have already learned to tie their bowline. So for that, check out the loops video. So I have a simple bowline, and I have a stick or a toggle, and I run my line around my tree, and then I could feed the standing end all the way through the loop. I could feed that all the way through the loop, but you can see I've got a great big amount of orange rope here. Let me just get that out of the way. See, if I had to feed that through, that's a pain in the butt. And then when I untie the knot, I have to feed it back through. So one of the shortcuts I teach is to bring your closed or prepared loop around, in this case a bowline. I reach through my loop and I pull a bite of the standing end through, and then I insert my toggle or tent stake, and then when I pull that tight, in essence what I've formed is another type of knot called a Marlin Spike, okay, or a Marlin hitch, Marlin Spike knot, Marlin Spike hitch. I can hitch the tree, hitch my rope to the tree with a Marlin Spike hitch, and I form that with a bite of the standing end pulled through a prepared loop. Okay? So Marlin Spike to the tree is a quick way to fasten your hitch. Then when it's time to go, you just yoink out your tent stake and it falls apart. All right? So that's the Marlin Spike hitch. Now another way you can come up to the tree, you can form what's called a running bowline. That would be when I took my prepared loop around and then I feed all of my rope through that loop. Then you'd have a running bowline. Another way to do that is to go around your tree, take your free end, make your overhand loop, go over your standing end, and then complete your bowline loop just like normal, right? And then I've made the running bowline. That hitches to the tree. If my bowline was already prepared, I could just feed the standing end through there, but that's a lot of work. So this is called the running bowline. Takes a little bit of time, not one I recommend for being quick, but you need to know the different types of hitches and ways to hitch. So far we have Marlin Spike hitch and the running bowline. So here's another one. This is one of my favorites. I'm going to go around the tree that I'm hitching to. I'm going to take my free end, also known as the running end or the working end or the tag end. I'm going to take my free end and I'm going to go over the top of my standing end, which is what runs back to another tree or my shelter, and I fold back just like this. Then I take that free end and I go over the free end a few times, right? At least 3 times, but I wind that around there. And then as I pull the free end, the friction will hold that against the tree, and I've made a timber hitch. Okay? Really good to do in the winter. The timber hitch is helpful. Now you notice it's not tied off. It's only a friction knot, a friction hitch, so it's not going to be, none of these hitches are going to be life-saving hitches. You wouldn't use these in climbing or in any kind of rigging where life and injury is a factor. These are simple bushcraft, fieldcraft, shelter making type of hitches. Okay, so that's the timber hitch. Easily loosened up. I just pull on the bite on the free end, it loosens up, and I can just unwind it. This one's good for the winter, just like the Marlin Spike, with a prepared loop, so I don't have to deal with frozen fingers. Okay. The next hitch you're going to need to know, besides the Marlin Spike hitch, the running bowline, which you can do, the timber hitch, you're going to want to come here, and now I've gone back to the tag or free end in my right hand, standing end in my left, and I'm going to make an underhand loop. Right, underhand loop. I just twist the free end under itself. Let me get a little more. Then the loop, or the free end, is going to go under the standing end, and then I'm going to pull a bite back down through that loop. Tighten it up. See how that tightens up? Then I slide that up to the tree, and I've made a Siberian hitch. Okay, Siberian hitch. Again, just a friction hitch. If I wanted to secure that Siberian hitch, I was worried about that coming out, I could always put a toggle through that loop. Now the Siberian hitch can't collapse on itself. Say if we have the toggle, and then I can put some weight on that and it won't go anywhere. But when it's time to come out, the Siberian hitch, even without that loop, is easy. Just pull on the free end and it comes out. Right? Let me put my toggle back down. So we've got the Siberian hitch, the timber hitch. Those are good for winter. So let me tie the other end off real quick, because we're going to use this to make the next most common, the trucker's hitch. So let me step off here for a second. Don't actually have to see that. Okay. Now here's another type of hitch. Usually the Marlin Spike, running bowline, the ones we've just done, are used to fasten one end. Then when I get down to the other end, and I'm going to tie, say, maybe a guide line, right, a guy line or a ridge line, sometimes called, I have to have a way to hitch this to the other end, maybe 2 trees, and put up an A-frame or something, right? And I want it to be secure, but if I tie one of my Siberian hitches or a timber hitch, there's still some slack in the standing part, the ridge line. So the most common knot we use to tighten this up is called the trucker's hitch. What I'm going to do is I go around my tree. So this one in my right is going to be my hitch. So I'm going to come back up the standing part, and I'm going to take my thumb and finger from on top, so my thumb pointing down, finger toward me, and get a twist in the rope. So now I've made an overhand loop. From my perspective, it's overhand because this part's crossing over the standing part. If I twist the other way, I'm going to get an underhand loop, which is fine. You just have to remember which, keep going the same way. Get an overhand loop, continue to twist until you can lay the overhand loop on the part that's headed towards your tree and pull a bite through. This will collapse down on itself, and you've essentially made what's called a running slip knot. A running slipped knot. See, this bite comes through and it's just caught in a simple overhand. If I were to pull the 2 ends of the line, it'll pop back through and disappear. So I'm making an overhand loop in the rope, a twist, and I'm pulling a bite of the standing end through. And I know it's the right way because it's headed toward the tree I'm hitching around. If you make a mistake, turn your overhand loop and lay it back across the standing end, the part that's already hitched, and pull that bite through. It looks the same, but if I pull it this way, you see the knot collapses down. It collapses on my finger or my line or whatever I'm pulling, and it'll be a pain to get undone. What you've done then is, if you're pulling that knot away from the tree, you've made a Marlin Spike hitch. We'll get back to that later. Overhand loop, pull a bite of the running end through toward the target, or the hitch, the object I'm hitching around. Now I have this free end. I go around my tree, and then I feed this through that loop I made. Okay? So I've got this running slipped knot, and I've got my free end running around the tree and then back through the running slip knot, and you can see using the mechanical advantage of pulleys, I can tighten this down really tight. Now to tie that off, the simplest way to do it is just to pinch the two ends, reach over the top, tuck a bite through, and you're going to get what's called just a slipped half hitch. I could feed this end, I could feed that all the way through there. I got a lot of knot, a lot of rope there. But I've just got a slipped half hitch. Once again, you can use your toggle and kind of tighten that down so it won't collapse through there. Now it can't come undone. I don't usually fasten them with toggles too much. If the weather's really, wind's blowing, I will. Or I'll take the bite and I'll just form another loose half hitch with the bite just to back that up. Okay, there's a half hitch with the bite. Now the trucker's hitch, once I've used that mechanical advantage to pull, when it's time to come apart, I just pull that out, pops free, I pull it through the loop, right, and then I pull that and it's all taken apart. Now a little bit quicker way to do that, I'm going to turn that running slip knot, so I got that trucker's knot. I can also tie an alpine butterfly, a figure eight, a slip figure eight there, any way I can get a loop that won't collapse. Now I got a lot of extra line here. I don't want to have to feed that all the way through, so sometimes I'll just take a bite and feed the bite through and leave the rest of that down through the loop and just pull the bite toward the tree. And I've got the same, in effect, the same knot. I just didn't feed it all the way through. Right? So I've just got that bite going through. And then I can run that around and get my half hitch. It's really big this time, but you get the idea. And now it's staying there. When it's time to go, I just pull that knot, half hitch comes out, and then it comes through there. Then there's a couple other little tricks like the auto locking and such of the trucker's hitch that I've shown people. Alright, so that's the trucker's hitch. Now another knot, a hitch that you're going to use a lot that we've shown so far, is the clove hitch. So we'll zoom in here. Maybe that sunlight's getting to be a pain. This is the basic clove hitch, and there are several versions of this. There's the thief's knot, the bag knot, the miller's knot, the constrictor knot. They're all versions of clove hitch, but let me show you. So here's my running end, goes around the tree. It's in my right hand. Left hand's the standing end. When I come around, I'm going to go over my standing end and around the tree again. Okay. When I come around, I'm going to go under that X, and I've made my clove hitch. Okay, just like that. Now the clove hitch will hold that real tight. The clove hitch is handy sometimes in the middle of a rope when I want the other end for something. Okay, can you see that clove hitch real good? Okay. And you can see it's a clove hitch. See how it goes around the standing end and then comes around and goes under itself, basically. Now another way you can form a clove hitch, let's say I had a pile, which is maybe a tree trunk cut off here. So a pile is like a tree that you have access to the top, like a tent stake. I can make a clove hitch by taking my line, turning an overhand loop, turning another overhand loop, and then laying the first loop over the second loop. Now if I were to drop that down on top of something, you can see that it's exactly the same knot I tied on the tree. So the clove hitch is handy because you can tie that and drop it down over a pile or a tent stake. Right? To tie it around the tree again, I come around the tree, I go over my standing end, and when I come around next time, I go under my standing end and then under myself. Now I've made a clove hitch. Tighten that up, dress that up a little bit. Clove hitch. Now, a big difference will be if I come around I go under the standing end, then back over the standing end and through that X. Now I've made, it's not much difference, what's called a constrictor knot. As this tightens down, it gets tighter and tighter, and it's almost impossible to untie without cutting afterwards. So never ever tie that around a tree or any living thing. The clove hitch, however, you go over, around the object, under, and then under itself. And now you've just made a clove hitch. And you see that's held in place like the other hitches just by friction. Okay? Clove hitch is okay to tie off, but you see it will, see how it's starting to work its way loose? It can collapse or slip. So I like the clove hitch for around the tent stakes or in the middle of the structures. All right, so let's say you've got another hitch that maybe you want an adjustable hitch. You can use this at the end instead of the trucker's hitch. You can use this with your tarps to guy them out and tighten them up, make them taut, which is why this is called the taut line hitch. Sometimes called the Boy Scout hitch, and it's very similar to a midshipman's hitch, but there's just little differences that knot people would like. But let's go over the taut line hitch. So I'm going to go around my tree, take my free end, and I'm going to lay that over my standing end. Then I'm going to, see it kind of forms a loop around the tree. I go over the standing end, I go through the loop 2 full times. So I've ended up coming back through the loop with the original crossing over, and then 2 full wraps up through the loop. Now I come out of the loop, and I go over the standing end again, and up through the smaller loop once. And then I dress that up by pushing those knots close. And this is called the taut line hitch. It's basically a friction hitch. Okay? So now, when there's tension on the standing end, that little barrel of turns will catch friction on the taut line, on the standing end. But if I take this knot, I can slide that barrel that way, or I can slide the barrel this way without untying the knot, and then once the friction's back down on it, it'll hold itself fast. Now this is a new cord, so it's kind of still stiff, so it's maybe not grabbing very well. But this is the taut line hitch. Sometimes on my tarp, I leave taut line hitches tied on the ends of my guy out line, so I can just adjust them around the stakes. Now let's say I have a stake, and I can tie a taut line hitch around that back to my tarp, and then tighten it up by sliding that barrel up or down. But another good knot to know for a pile or a stake that you can get over the top of, right? Like I turned my 2 overhand loops, set the first loop over the top, and then I can drop that down over the top of my stake, and I've got my clove hitch again. But another one that's quicker that you'll need to know is called the pile hitch, or the tent stake hitch. I'm going to take a bite, kind of a longish bite. I'm going to go around the stake or tree, but I have to have access to the top, cross under myself, me being the rope. Let me anthropomorphize the rope for a minute. Under the rope, and then flip that bite or loop up over the end of the stake. Pull it tight, and you'll end up with the pile or tent stake hitch. And then that holds, and then I would pile hitch that onto a tent stake or a stick, and then I drag the whole thing out tight and pound the stick down to the ground. And it comes off easy. I can just slide the whole pile of rope up to the top and slip that off there. So that's the pile hitch. Okay, I won't repeat these too much. You can just rewind it. Actually, I'll need this one for a minute. All right, so this is just a preparation knot. Next, I'm going to show you the cleat hitch knot. All right, so we'll go around here, and let's say I have a cleat, which I don't, but I'm going to make a fake one here. So I have this stick, and I want to hitch around this small toggle. Sometimes we use this one to fasten our initial corner of our stake to a tree, like after we put the tent stake through to the tree. This is called a cleat hitch. So I've got an open cleat, 2 ends, it's fastened in the middle on a stick. What I can do is I'm going to come up, I'm going to go behind 1 foot of the cleat, and then I'm going to figure 8 around the cleat a couple times. Figure 8 around the cleat, right? Because this is my standing end over here. Now to lock that off, instead of just continuing to figure 8 when I get over here, I'm going to turn the rope under itself, so an underhand loop. Now when I flip that over the end, you can see that the rope is going to bind down on itself and lock tight. Come over to the other side of the cleat, underhand loop, throw that up over the cleat, lock it down tight. Now my rope's been locked off tight with what's called a cleat hitch. That's another hitch that we use quite often. Anytime we're going around like usually a toggle or a stake that's already in a line. Right? Cleat hitch. Okay. All right, let's see. We did the running Bowline. We did the Marlin Spike. We did the trucker's hitch. We did taut line hitch. We did Siberian hitch. We did pile hitch, clove hitch. Last one is the girth hitch. So this is another one that goes usually around a stake or something you have access to the top. Okay? You're going to make a lark's head. So lark's head, I take the bite, and I'm going to take the top of the bite, I'm going to fold it back down over itself, forming these 2 ears. The ears collapse on each other so that the bite is basically folded back on itself. And you've got this loop. The lark's head is the form of the knot, but once it's around something, right, it's going to form what's called the girth hitch or cow hitch. There again, for knot nerds, there's some differences between the lark's head, the girth hitch, and the cow hitch, and the bull hitch. Don't worry about those too much right now. This is just the lark's head hitch, and you're going to need to use this a lot. Now, what if I can't slip it around something like this tree? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the tree with my free end. I go over my standing end, back around the tree, and then through that bite right next to my standing end, and then you see we've formed the lark's head or girth hitch around the tree. Now this one is also, like the clove hitch, prone to collapse. Okay? It's good in other situations. We'll talk about usage of knots in another video. I just want you to be familiar with the different knots, and then we'll talk about when and why they're used. Once you get your lark's head here, you can secure that with a half hitch. You can turn it into a bull hitch. There's lots of ways. You could combine your lark's head, right, with a small timber hitch by wrapping and tucking that free end around a few times. Right? Then I can cinch that all down, and maybe I've got a lark's head with a kind of a timber hitch backup. Right? If you don't know how to tie a knot, just tie a lot. Isn't that what they say? Anyway, ignore that mess. I was just giving you an example of what you can do with that end. But a lark's head is typically used for us a lot in making a bend. So if I've reached the end of my rope and I've just got a stopper knot in the end and I want to attach another line, a lot of times we'll just throw a lark's head, put that knot through, and tighten that down on there. But that's bends. We'll do that in the next video. So I think that was all the hitches I wanted to teach you. I'll count them up and make sure that they get listed in the description. There's hitches. Start learning.